Welcome in to another episode of Home Field Advantage. Hope you're having a great week wherever you may be across our great country or our great land. My name is Will Highland, recording on August 19th, 2025, publishing August 20th, 2025. If you don't mind, I'm going to move the microphone a little bit closer to me here. Okay. We have a lot to get to on the show. We are in the midst of things in the month of August. We're got the Little League World Series going on, which is always fun. NFL training camp, preseason, college football starts next week. We have Major League Baseball pennant race, all kinds of news across the sports world. I'm going to try and hit four topics tonight. I'm going to try to do so in as concise a way as possible and hopefully get the show 25-30 minutes roughly speaking. All right. Last week I talked about the NFC playoff picture, who I thought might be a contender in the NFC. And in in doing so, I had the overall thesis that the NFC was coming down to two divisions. It was either going to be the NFC South or the NFC West. Um, that was going to determine how the rest of the conference looked, and I believe that to be true still. Uh, I think the North is going to be competitive, and I think the East is going to be fairly competitive between Dallas, Washington, and Philadelphia. In terms of at least two of those teams are going to make the playoffs. I'd be surprised if that division only has one playoff team, for example. Okay, in the AFC, I think it's still conventional wisdom that it's going to be the Chiefs' conference until it's not. What I mean by that is the Chiefs have gone to seven straight AFC title games. If they go this year again, they will they will tie the Patriots' record of eight straight. That was set in conjunction with this Chiefs uh, run because they met in 2018-19. So from one run led to another, if you know what I mean. So I think it's going to be the Chiefs conference until it's not for the foreseeable future, as long as Patrick Mahomes is wearing number 15 for Kansas City and as long as Andy Reid is there. And even if Andy Reid walks off into the sunset, I think as long as Mahomes for the next 10 years or so, the Chiefs are going to be a factor. The same way the Patriots were a factor from 2002 to 2018. It's just how that's going to be. Elsewhere in the conference, though, the big question is the Cincinnati Bengals. Joe Burrow has often been talked about as a top five quarterback in this league, and we know he has the talent to do that. He's faced injuries, his team has underperformed. Even when he has performed well, his team has not delivered, and they've failed to reach the mountaintop that they reached when they beat the Chiefs. I believe it will be 4 years ago now at this point. Um, so they failed to get back there, and in fact they were really close to doing it the year after. You had the AFC title game rematch. The Bengals were so close to beating them in Kansas City in January of 23 as well. So like it's been a few years now since the Bengals were back where they were supposed to be, which was a perennial AFC contender with Joe Burrow as their quarterback. Now, a lot of that's because of personnel issues. I think they've overpaid certain parts of their roster, namely Jamar Chase and T. Higgins together. I think in the long run, in a league like the NFL, it's really hard when you're paying three guys like almost half your salary cap. It's just really hard to do that. Um, and that's shown to be a problem because Trey Hendrickson now wants to be traded. Uh, and he's of course their best defensive player. So I think how good Cincinnati is going to tell the story of the rest of the conference because the West is going to be the West. I think the West is going to be competitive between the Chargers and the Broncos. I still think Kansas City's going to win that division. They're just going to win a bunch of close games. I think they won 11 one-score games last year. I think they were undefeated in one-score games. Uh, if my memory serves me. last year. Uh, and and likewise, the Chargers are 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 still a talented enough team on paper to to be in the mix in the AFC West. I don't think they're going to win the division, but I could see them poking around. And the Raiders, of course, have Pete Carroll. I don't know if that's going to make a huge change because their roster's still not very good, but they're playing a easy schedule, and you know strangely enough, the only coach in that conference who hasn't or only coach in that division who hasn't won a Super Bowl has won a national championship. That's Jim Harbaugh. So I mean that there's a lot of winning in that division. I think it's going to be competitive, but I still think it's the Chiefs division. All right, I think the AFC South is kind of a pillow fight. The Colts announced today that they're going to have Daniel Jones be their starter. They've essentially given up on Anthony Richardson, who they drafted number 4 overall 2 years ago. It's a insane choice to make. But the Colts, since the retirement of Andrew Luck, have constantly made band-aid fixes at the quarterback position. Think going back to the Philip Rivers or the Carson Wentz or the Matt Ryan or the I'm missing somebody. Joe Flacco experience. There's all kinds of weird things going on with the Colts and their quarterback situation. So I think the South is, and the Colts don't have that good of a team. I mentioned this last week. One of the things that bothers me the most about the preseason is that everyone's gassing up their teams, and the Colts team blows. They blow. They're gonna suck. They were gonna suck no matter who was quarterback. If I was quarterback, they were gonna suck. If Peyton Manning in 2005 was quarterback, if you brought 2005 Peyton Manning to this 20 years later to this Colts team, they probably go 9-7. That's how bad they are. Um, at best. So the Colts are going to be bad. I feel pretty confident saying that. And if I'm wrong, I'll eat it and I'll say it and I'll admit it. But and the Colts are going to be garbage. Similarly, the South has sort of this conventional wisdom that the the Texans are just going to win the division. Well, I mean, sure, the division is trash, so that very well may be the case. But Jacksonville kind of has an axe to grind a little bit. I think if there was ever a situation where you would call it a make or break season, it's kind of a make or break season for Trevor Lawrence. Like he's just. I heard a Jacksonville reporter say the other day that the hope of Trevor Lawrence ever being like a top 5 quarterback is kind of gone. Like he's just not going to be that guy, which is crazy considering, speaking of Andrew Luck, Lawrence was the most pro-ready quarterback we had had when he was drafted in 2021 since Andrew Luck 10 years earlier, right? But because Lawrence is such a has been such a disappointment in terms of the production, right? And the operation around him has been such a train wreck. We might never see a top 5 quarterback of Trevor Lawrence the same way that Andrew Luck was probably never a top 5 quarterback either. Because during his career, you had Brady and Manning and Breeze and Rodgers, and that's just off the top of my head without even thinking about who some of the other quarterbacks were at that point. Um, and Cam Newton, even early on, they kind of came up at the same time, etc. So that that is that is something that baffles me is what the AFC South is going to be. It's not a guarantee that any one of those teams are going to be very good. And then we're not even going to waste any time talking about the Tennessee Titans. I'm just not gonna do that. So and then the East is kind of like, well, the Bills. Yeah, I think the Bills are gonna be pretty good. I think they're gonna probably win 12 or more games. After that though, like, is it the Dolphins? Maybe. I mean, the Dolphins are like The Dolphins are like a New Year's resolution. Okay, they start out great, and then by 4 weeks later, no one's talking about the Dolphins anymore. They're like a New Year's resolution. I don't want to sound like Colin Cowherd with all these analogies, but that I mean, maybe I do. He has millions of people listen to him every day, but like that's that's probably what I point out is that like the Miami Dolphins, you can get jazzed up about how they look. They're going to look great. They're probably going to blow out the Patriots in week 2, right? And everyone's going to be gassing up Tua. And then by the time we get to Halloween, they'll be out of the playoff picture completely. And I'm not even going to pull up their schedule. That's just how confident I am in this situation. Jets, do we believe in Justin Fields? Has Justin Fields produced anything that makes us believe in him? He somewhat got Pittsburgh to the playoffs last year in a committee-like quarterback situation, but I've also seen what Justin Fields looks like when he is the sole determining quarterback and he doesn't have a Super Bowl winning guy to take his job or get his job from, right? Like it's going to be solely on Justin Fields with the New York Jets because the rest of this roster is good. Like the Jets should be good. They're another one of these teams that we talk about every year. Oh, the Jets roster's really good, and then the Jets suck every year. Now, look, I know part of it was Aaron Rodgers' injury a few years ago. Part of it was the Zach Wilson, which might be the worst draft pick in the history of the NFL, taking him at number 2 overall. Although the rest of that class wasn't amazing, but still, I think the Jets are one of those franchises that people are trying to predict their turnaround. I mean, USA Today thought they were going to the Super Bowl last year. The Rodgers experiment failed, and now we're stuck with maybe a situation where Justin Fields could be better than he was in Chicago, but probably not. I mean, that's like I was saying, last time I saw Justin Fields in charge by himself was the Chicago years, and none of those years turned out very well because they wanted to move on from him as soon as they could and draft Caleb Williams. And then lastly, my Patriots, like, is Drake May the guy? Like that's kind of the question. And like, because this defense is really good. I think the defense is going to be really good. I think the skill players are better. I think the running back room is pretty good. The offensive line is a massive question mark. And Drake May is, we'll see. I think a lot of Patriots fans are going to tell you that, you know, this team is a lot better than last year. I think on paper they are, and I think they've looked operational during the preseason. I think Mike Vrabel is going to provide that for them, but I'm not convinced that this is a long-term thing that's going to be a uh, a band-aid that you won't have to replace. Like there could be a couple more years where the Patriots are below average to average before we even start talking about them being a division contender. I'm just trying to be neutral here. But look, Drake May, if he's good and he has some of those sophomore year next steps that we've seen out of some guys, like a CJ Stroud, for example, or excuse me, not CJ Stroud, Kyler Murray, like a Kyler Murray, for example, that would be great. Um, but I would also point out that, like Kyler Murray, Drake May is the kind of guy where, if he relies too much on his legs a little bit, and too much on his mobility because his offensive line is bad, he could end up wearing down a lot like Kyler Murray has worn down and underperformed. So we'll have to see. Okay. My big picture AFC thought, it comes down to the North. If the Ravens, Bengals, and Steelers are all pretty good and the Browns aren't like a bottom feeder, Like if the Browns are like 6-11 as opposed to 3-14, I think that means they win some divisional games they probably weren't supposed to win, and that makes the Steelers or the Ravens or whatnot have a lesser record than they should. Same thing with Cincinnati, and therefore that shifts around the playoff teams a little bit. Um, yeah, I think that's the X factor. I think if Cincinnati and Pittsburgh and Cleveland, because I think everyone agrees that Baltimore's going to be pretty good. But I think if those three teams, if none of them are like the worst among the worst two or three in the whole conference, like let's say the Raiders, the Pats, and the Colts or something, or the Raiders, the Jets, and the Colts, or the Raiders, the Colts, and let's say Denver takes a step back or something. Like if those teams are like bad, then that means maybe Cleveland isn't. And then that means Cleveland might not make the playoffs. I'm not saying they're going to make the playoffs, but if they're 6-11 and they still miss the playoffs, that means they probably won some divisional games that's going to cause the Ravens to have to go to Kansas City in the playoffs, for example, if you're following me. So I think that's the big X factor in the AFC that you're not going to hear anywhere else because everyone's going to be participating in hot take Olympics telling you, X team is going to win the division or whatever. I'm telling you, and maybe I'll have some of those when I get together with Cam and Kyle. But what I'm telling you is that those teams matter because a rising tide lifts all boats in most cases. But in the NFL, a rising tide sinks other people's boats, right? If the Patriots are 7-10, that probably means the Dolphins aren't in the playoffs either, because that means the Dolphins are like 9-8 and not good enough to make a wild card. That's what that means. Um, and like if the Ravens truly want to get over the hump, I would say that's probably the second X factor to predict in the AFC is, are the Ravens good enough to make a jump? They're gonna have to have home playoff games. You're gonna have to do it. Mahomes has only lost two home playoff games in his career. He's lost two Super Bowls and two home title games. One to Joe Burrow, one to Tom Brady, and then a Super Bowl to the Eagles and the Pats. Or excuse me, a Super Bowl to the Eagles and the Buccaneers. Sorry, I forgot Tom Brady played for the Buccaneers that Super Bowl. It feels like we beat him because we did in 2018-19 when Mahomes was a first-year starter. I digress. If you're gonna catch a trap game from Mahomes in the playoffs and the Chiefs in the playoffs, it might have to happen in Baltimore or in Cincinnati. I just don't see. I mean, if they're at Arrowhead, I like their chances. I do. Despite what Joe Burrow might have done in Arrowhead in the past. If my options are Chiefs or uh, Bengals in an AFC title game in Kansas City, I'm going Chiefs 99 out of 100. All right. That's my NFL take. We'll have some time to dissect it when Cam and Kyle join the program, but for the sake of time, I want to rifle through these last three topics as quick as I can. First thing, Olympic camp, also known as what's the exact word they call it? They called it the U.S. Men's Olympic Orientation Camp. The roster was announced today. And, we're going to have a lot of time to talk about the U.S. men's hockey team on Odd Man Rush with Diesel. But because it dropped today, I would be remiss if I didn't go through this. So I'm going to read some of these um, names. So you have Matt Boldy, Cole Caulfield, Logan Cooley, which I think I'm glad he's getting an invite. Um, First of all, Matt Boldy did make the Four Nations, so I'm just gonna tell you if they're new since the Four Nations. Logan Cooley is new since the Four Nations. So is Cole Caulfield. Connor was at the Four Nations. Eichel was at the Four Nations. Garland was not. Gensel was there. Jack Hughes was there. Patrick Kane was not there. I think that's an interesting pick considering Pat Kane was on that 2010 Olympic team 16 years ago that won a silver medal. It was a stacked team. It would be nice to see him on the team, but I don't know if he makes it. Clayton Keller was not at the Four Nations. Nyes was not at the Four Nations. Kreider was. Larkin was. Matthews was. Miller was. Um, Frank Mazar was not. Brock Nelson was there. Shane Pinto was not there. Jason Robertson was not there. Brian Rust was not there. Tage Thompson was not there. Brady Tkachuk and Vinny Trocheck were there, and Alex uh, Tuck was not there. So the big name missing here is Matt Tkachuk. Matt Tkachuk is only not on this list because of an injury. If he's healthy, he will be on the Olympic team. Like, let me just see. I mentioned Austin Matthews' name, and my face disappeared for a second on the YouTube stream. All right, that's an inside joke for those of you who get it. Thank you. But all these guys, there's a lot of new faces on the forward group. Matt Tkachuk obviously not mentioned, um, but that's likely due to a an injury situation. There's not anyone else that I can think of that was at Four Nations that's not on this list for the forwards. If there is, I'll think about it and correct myself later. On defense, Faber was there, Adam Fox was there, Hannafin was there, Luke Hughes was not there. I find that interesting. Quinn Hughes was going to be there, then wasn't there. Seth Jones was not there. I think his performance with the Florida Panthers in the Stanley Cup playoffs earned this. Jackson Lacombe was not there. McAvoy was there, and I think if McAvoy was there in the championship game and didn't get injured, I think you might be able to say things could have looked differently for the United States. We'll never know. Canada was missing some guys too. Ryan McDonough, I don't believe was there. Pesci was not there. Neil Pionk was not there. Sanderson was at the Four Nations. I can never pronounce his name. Brady Skagee? Skahi? I don't know. He wasn't. He was not at the Four Nations. Jacob Slavin was at the Four Nations. He's probably the best defender in the whole tournament, considering he played all the games. Um, Alex Vlasic was not there, but Werenski was. So some returnees there, and then the goalies. The big news is that obviously you have Hellebuck, Ottinger, and Swayman, who we've talked about on Odd Man Rush and on this program a lot. But Dustin Wolf from Calgary's, who I thought was going to get this four slot, it was Joey Decord from the Kraken, is actually the four goalie right now. And obviously they're only going to take three to Italy. But I think after health, performance is going to do um, a lot to determine who gets these roles, of course. And if Swayman doesn't bounce back, even though he had a great showing at the World Championships, helping the United States win gold there, I think Decord could easily slide into that three slot. I think Hellebuck and Ottinger are getting the one and two, and I think it's up to Swayman or Decord to get that three spot. I think Swayman has the inside track. Now, this roster is for the orientation camp is not final. The teams will probably be announced later on in the year, probably closer to New Year's Day, as is normal. But if I'm a USA hockey fan, which I am, I'd be pretty excited about this list and some of the options they have there. Um, you bring 24 forwards, and you got to trim it down to probably 14. That means 10 really good hockey players are not going to make the the roster. All right, baseball. Two quick thoughts. Uh, Someone asked me, am I concerned about the Red Sox bullpen? The answer is yes. I think if you're a serious World Series contender, which I believe the Red Sox want to be, then Isaiah Campbell is not a option for you late in the game. I think Greg Weissert and Justin Slayton are wearing down a little bit. I think Jordan Hicks has not looked great. I think Chapman, while smart that they have limited him early in the year, I do wonder how well this run of a 40-year-old closer can continue, or however old he is. He's certainly not young anymore. He's not a spring chicken. So I worry about all these things with the Red Sox. I worry about the bullpen and the fact that they haven't looked great recently. Uh, really since that 7 game winning streak in late July, early August, they haven't looked amazing. Um, I think they've lost some winnable games, whether it be to the Marlins or the Orioles recently, or even as far back as that Astros series. I think they left some wins on the table. And these games are going to matter a lot. Um, I will give the Red Sox credit. They are in the mix for the division still, even though Toronto has a 5 game lead. They're in a comfortable wild card position with 3 games up on Cleveland heading into tonight. Um, I mean, it's not entirely comfortable, but they're comfortably in the wild card mix. They're not on the outside looking in at this point in the year. But I think by Labor Day, if the Red Sox aren't within, don't have a 4 or more game lead in the wild card, or aren't within 3 games of Toronto, I'm going to be a little worried about them sustaining their playoff spot heading into the final weeks of the season. And the bullpen's going to have a lot to do with it. Who knows? We might end up seeing somebody like Peyton Tolley or David Sandlin make the roster. But hey, they're in the mix. They're still in the mix for the division, which is what I said all offseason. All right, speaking of divisions, um, go. This is my free plug to end the show. Go back. I'll try and I'll post it on socials tomorrow, or Wednesday, whenever you're listening. Maybe Thursday. Go back and listen to my MLB Realignment pod. I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna find it. I'm gonna post a link. People have been talking about MLB Realignment. I saw Matt from Jim Bowden from USA Today, uh, and his realignment division map in Major League Baseball looked a lot like the one I made. Um, I think this is well overdue. I think Major League Baseball should have 8 divisions, 4 in the National League, 4 in the American League. You can do it by adding 2 expansion teams, which they certainly um, I would benefit from, and 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 more importantly, they could do it without messing up too many interconference, or excuse me, interleague changeovers. Like when the Astros came to the American League, for example, or when the Brewers went to the National League earlier on in I think that was in '80s or '90s. Uh, they could easily do this without changing over maybe 2 teams at most. You'd add 1 American League franchise and 1 National League franchise, and then you would have 8 divisions geographically aligned. I laid it all out. You'd have your 4 division winners make the playoffs, and then you'd have 1 wild card. And the 1 wild card, you'd go back, you'd have 5 playoff teams because you have a better chance of winning your division when there's only 4 teams in. So that's how you justify it. Then you have 1 wild card, and the top seed gets a bye. Boom, over. 10 teams in the playoffs, 10 out of 32. It's still very competitive, and you even it out. You get good rivalry games. It's a no-brainer if they expand to realign the divisions to have 8 teams. Excuse me, 8 divisions, 4 in each. If they do 2 divisions with 8 teams, that would be a mess, and nobody wants that. So that's my plug because I honestly like the fact that the Red Sox only play the Yankees twice at Fenway in a whole 162 games is stupid. It's stupid, and we're getting ready to play the Yankees this week. I feel the same way. It's asinine that that we're only going to Yankee Stadium twice. You gotta bring that back. You have to bring that back. It's a necessity. But that's how I'm gonna end the show. Anyway, check it out. MLB Realignment. I did a pod on it a couple of years ago, and it would fix a lot of problems. All right, that's gonna do it for this episode of Home Field Advantage. I appreciate you tuning in to the program. As always, you can subscribe online at um, Home Field Pod on both Twitter and Instagram. You can also like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, you can subscribe there. Appreciate you tuning in to the video stream. But until next time, my name is Will Highland. This has been home field advantage.